next speaker is myself. And then I'm proud to introduce myself. And then we will have Caitlin Crockett joining us in a couple of minutes. But before, we will hear of Susan Bissell. And from me, you just, if you could please get my presentation. Most of you know me. I'm Arturo Cervantes. I'm currently director at the recently created Mexicans Against Corruption and Impunity. And I have the pleasure of speaking to you about supporting Goal 16 through the prevention of corruption and impunity. If I could please get my slides up there. It's not open. Maybe you need to go to the folder where you have the presentations. And right there, that one. Is this the control? Yes, okay. So it is my pleasure. Could I please get the slides? Thank you. It is my pleasure to be moderating this session and to be presenting on SDG 16 and contributing through the reduction of corruption and impunity. In a way, in the last couple of days that we've been discussing these topics, I had this thought that there is nothing new around the sun. And I was thinking of Rudolf Virchow, who was born in 1821. As you know, he's a Russian physician who discovered or described for the first time the ill health conditions of workers who were exposed to extreme treatment by the factories and the industries in London. And he was speaking about social determinants way long ago, and he knew that there was an inherent connection. And then I jump back every time I come here to this forum and remember what it's all about. And it was only in 1948 that we had the first and that we had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which I think lays down the groundwork for most of what we are discussing here and for the SDGs themselves. And then people met in Kazakhstan, in Russia in 1978 with the Health for All movement and the primary health movement that is discussing the universal, selective, and targeted interventions necessary across the whole spectrum in order to improve health of the world, the health of the population. And this, not long afterwards, Uri Bronfenbrenner, who many of you know, who wrote The Ecology of Human Development, Experiments of Nature and Design, he began to explain to us how it's all interconnected from the moment of birth and even before, and that actual biological and psychological outcomes are connected. The ecological theory has permeated the discussions in this forum for a long time, since its inception. And then I thought about salutogenesis and about Professor Aaron Antonovsky from Haifa University and how he speaks of wellness as a coherent whole, and how he speaks about the need of moving society towards health. And I think that with these building blocks came to my mind the long story that we, the forum members, have shared over the last couple of years, or over the last 6 or 7 years. And this is just the first announcement of the first meeting that we held in 2011. And I think as a group we have come a long way. These are only 4 of the 8 volumes of research that this group has produced over the last 6 or 7 years. And I think it's a very important contextual and point of departure for what I'm about to say. So we are discussing the Sustainable Development Goals, which most importantly are a landmark opportunity, as Jim was saying. In a way, looking at the Universal Declaration on Human Rights together with Agenda 2030 and the SDGs, these are in a way self-evident truths. And as Jim was saying, SDGs matter, and they matter because the whole world has come to a consensus on the challenges that humanity faces to make progress on several fields. And this is very important. Now, focusing on SDG number 16, I think we should all celebrate it. It's a great jump from the Millennium Development Goals to have SDGs that actually have this kind of wording. In this SDG, to promote just, peaceful, and inclusive society, peace and governance are implicated in the success of all of the other 15 SDGs. Tony People was saying that USAID supports and that the United States supports this goal completely, and it's a great accomplishment for humanity to have these targets and these goals. When you look at 16-4, really? Is it on the global agenda? I can't believe it. I can't believe that this specific metric and target of reducing illicit arms and cash flows is on the agenda. If we have it there, now let's aim to accomplish it. But there's other very important goals and targets in that goal 16, reducing corruption and bribery. And I think that corruption and bribery is one of the core social determinants for many of the ills, including interpersonal and collective violence, that are affecting our societies throughout the world. And there is incredible, I feel very good that we have this consensus to develop effective, accountable, and transparent institutions throughout the developing world who are in a pressing need for them. And also target 16.7 regarding inclusive, participatory, and representative decision-making at all levels. These goals are amazing. I am very happy for them because justice and accountability and inclusion are at the core of this global discussion. Well, if these things are not relatively new, some of the things that we've been discussing in this forum are relatively new in terms of violence prevention. And I would say that a lot has been accomplished by the hard work of many people in this forum and of the Violence Prevention Alliance member in having now a common typology of violence that we can all use. And much has been accomplished in the last few years regarding the neuroscience of violence and the importance of violence prevention. And we've heard about that throughout this morning. In the last couple of years also, I seem to feel that ecological risk and protective factors have really become grounded in the discourse of many nations when they are talking about prevention. Alongside, we have become very clear about the connections of the social determinants and of the importance of addressing violence along the life course. And these recent discussions that are also discovering the need for integrated approaches and for collaborative implementation, I think are extremely important. Extremely important that we understand that these SDGs and that this Agenda 2030 is not divided and it shouldn't be siloed. All these efforts are aiming at wellness of humanity, at wellness of an individual. And I think that is a very important advance. And finally, Agenda 2030 is science-based. And we are talking, and the interagency expert group is discussing the measures. And I think this is extremely important because if it is science-based and if it is measurable, we are going to be able to implement cost-effective interventions. So with this background, let me mention and talk to you a bit about our organization of recent creation, Mexicans Against Corruption and Impunity. In previous sessions, you have heard me share the terrible aspects of our country in Mexico in terms of poverty. Around half of our childhood lives in poverty. 90% of indigenous children live in poverty. But in this millennium, we have seen more than 350,000 deaths because of homicides. And I have also shared here that most of these homicides are carried out with US originated weapons. And you have also heard me speak about the more than 35 million crimes and delinquent acts that are occurring, which affect almost a third of all households in my country. So now I will not give you the epidemiology as an epidemiologist of crime and violence. I will speak mostly about corruption, impunity, and injustice. Because injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, as Martin Luther King said. So looking at the issue of corruption and impunity in Mexico, I can share with you that we are among the worst in the Americas. Out of 32 countries measured, we are number 22 in the Americas. But if you look only at the OECD countries, Mexico is the last in that list in terms of the Corruption Perception Index by Transparency International. When you ask the citizens of Mexico to what extent they believe corruption is a problem in the public sector, you would be amazed to see that more than 90% of all Mexicans think it's a serious problem or that it's a problem, corruption in the public sector in our country. Corruption is a nationwide problem in Mexico. If you ask any state what is their public's perception of corruption, you will see a range from a low of 65% of all inhabitants in some states to close to 96% in others, but with a mean of 85% of citizens thinking that corruption in the public sector is a big problem. Also, importantly, when you ask the citizens if corruption is a problem among their personal social circles, oh no, then it's not me. Among my relatives, they're never corrupt or they're rarely corrupt. Or among my neighbors and friends, no, they're not that corrupt either. My coworkers, oh, maybe a little bit more corrupt. But there is this absence of a conscience of how Mexicans in their everyday life are corrupt and commit a lot of acts that go impune. There is an incredible index, a national index of corruption and good government, where Transparency Mexico worked with it. Mexicans consider ourselves very honest people, but there are more than 200 million registered acts of petty corruption every day, and each one is costing close to $10. This is more than $1.8 billion in petty acts of corruption by people who think that they are very honest or that their friends and relatives are pretty honest and they would never commit a corrupt act. This is striking because in Mexico there is a deficient culture of legality. When you ask citizens if they should always obey the law, even if they think it's an unfair law, more than 56% of all Mexicans would say that they disagree. They totally disagree. They wouldn't have to obey the law if they think that it is unfair. This is lacking a culture of legality in the states, in the Mexican states. Just so that you get a sense of the scope of the problem, there's a lot of entities who have done estimates of the cost of corruption in the country. And the estimates of loss go from 2% to 10% of GDP. Our group is taking the average of 5% of GDP as the cost of corruption every year that is not being invested in development. For example, cost is 7 times high, the budget cuts that were recently announced by our president in the order of 130 billion pesos, 7 times more. This is more than 200 times the budget of all our Mexican anti-corruption institutions. This is more than 89 times the budget of the largest university in the Americas, which is UNAM. This is more than 17 times the budget of the Justice Department, etc. You get the point. We have incredible economic and social costs because of corruption and impunity. So, what are the impacts on society? There's tremendous negative impacts on society that impede wellness and at the individual and the collective level. Corruption is a regressive and illegal tax. It has been estimated that 14% on average of household income is destined to extra official payments. But if you go down the ladder of wealth for those making the minimum wage, this percentage can go all the way up to a third of their income and their salary paid in extra official payments. There's also enormous political costs. Mexicans are dissatisfied with democracy. Only 19%, 1 in 5 Mexicans is satisfied with a democracy. More than 9 out of 10 think that political parties are corrupt, that politicians are corrupt, that political institutions are corrupt. And we all know from the Institute for Peace and Economic Studies and much of the literature that has been cited in our reports that there's an important correlation between corruption and violence. 44% of companies in Mexico admit having paid bribes. And they pay bribes to take part in official bids, to ease procedures, to obtain licenses. So this is a huge problem. The ethical behavior of private firms in the country is compromised. And although we are not the worst in the world, we are midway between and far from the best economies in the world. According to the Global Impunity Index, Mexico is the second worst among 59 countries. Less than half of the prison population is yet to receive a sentence. And we have a lot of police officers, but we don't have enough judges. Just so that you get a sense of the more than 33 million crimes, 97% go impune. Nobody is punished. People do not end up in jail. And the trust in institutions is incredibly low. People do not trust the institutions and do not trust the authorities in the country. So this epidemic is fueling collective and interpersonal violence. It's facilitating crime and strengthening delinquency. It's impeding the economic growth and delegitimizing our democratic institutions, and most definitely as well increasing inequality. So what are we doing about it? This new organization, Mexicans Against Corruption and Impunity, believe that we can't stay arms crossed with this phenomena and that we are not condemned to be a corrupt country. We believe that this is not exclusive of the public sector. It pervades all other sectors and all activities of our society, and we are all part of the problem and of the solution. And corruption is an issue that goes far beyond the abuse of public office. It's happening in many ways and in many decisions that are unduly benefiting people. We think that these acts can be prevented and that these networks can be dismantled by effective policies and civic leadership. And we are working towards those goals clearly stated in Agenda 2030, specifically in Objective 16. So based on these beliefs, we will be contributing decisively to the fight against corruption and impunity in the country, trying to contribute to the establishment of the rule of law as a prerequisite for democratic governance and to build our country in a just and prosperous way. The way the organization is done is with a group of applied researchers doing applied science, journalism, strategic litigation in the court system, mobilizing the citizenship and applying principles and practices of social mobilization that have been successful for many public health issues. So we celebrate being here. We think that our country cannot wait, and that to delay this effort would be unjust. And as Susan Bissell was asking some time ago, the world can't wait. If it is not now, then when? If it is not us, then who will do it? We are glad to be a part of this effort. So I think there's many new things around the sun. We are reaffirming that violence is preventable and that the fight against corruption and impunity is at the core of these factors. I think here a resounding common sense about the importance of this fight in the world is clearly evident with our discussions about Agenda 2030 and the science-based SDGs. And now it's all about if we are up to the challenge, if we will go at this. And I think it's a key issue for international cooperation. So thank you very much, and right on time.